name is Jeff Yull. Some of you know me, some of you do not. Those are the fortunate ones. First of all, can you hear me well enough?
Yeah.
Great. That's the important thing. I'm chairman for the North Reading Republican Town Committee. This is a bipartisan issue that's affecting the whole town. And I'm a very delineal person, meaning that I separate what I do under one circumstance to another circumstance. Okay? So, as chairman, we do this for the community. We've done it for quite a number of years now, and this is only one of the community events that we have done throughout the years. And it's been always handled in a respectful, professional, unbiased manner, because we believe that what's important is that the voters in the community are made as knowledgeable as they possibly can make them for decisions that they have to make that are important to them. So I'm not going to take too much of your time for me because it has to do with what we're doing. In setting this up, we did have some complications. We had to deal with open meeting law because we had invited selectmen who are members of the select board and members of the CPC who are in favor of the MBTA 3A Act, and we invited those who have a lot of questions about that, and that's from the CPC. So we have to make sure we follow open meeting law. So we had to change our venue a little bit different. I was going to have 3 on this side and 3 on that side, and they were all going to share what their perspectives were. It's unfortunate that those who are proponents of the 3A Act chose not to come. Okay? And they, I think the thing that I find very frustrating, they only wanted to hear their side of the story. And they only wanted you to hear their side of the story. But this Community Planning Commission within North Reading did the unthinkable in local politics. They wanted you to hear the full facts, both sides. So we do have here members of the CPC, which is Chairman David Butler, and we have CPC member Jeff Griffin. On the select board side, we have Nick Massey. So we have them out in the audience because, again, so last night, the town had a meeting, and they had the attorney for the town council, answer 14 questions. What we're going to do is we're going to go over these questions again like they did last night, because I know not everybody here was there or saw it. And now we're going to get a different perspective on the answers than what the attorney gave. We have, can you, Michael, can you scroll that up a little bit for me, please? Yeah, I want to go, I should say down. Okay, so in the black, you have the question, and in the red is the answer that the attorney for the town did. And
can you make it bigger?
No, we can't, but I will read it for you. Yeah, well.
That's better.
There you go. What do I know? Yeah, no, I think I will read it. And I'll point it out. And we're going to ask the attorneys in the room to give their perspective that have been involved. Now, the attorneys that we have is Viens, who is from Winthrop. Michael Walsh, who's from Enfield. And I'm going to say John, and he's going to say his last name for me. I mean, I know that. Kolakowski. I should know that, right? Kolakowski, did I say that, Joe? So he's been involved in the Rockport. Are you involved in the lawsuit, correct? Okay, against the state for being unconstitutional. Do I have that correctly? Okay. All right. So let me not delay any further because we want to use a hard 8:30 because there's a debate tonight that we all want to see. Okay. So let me go on. Okay. So here's the first question: where does the town get the authority to create zoning districts? The State Zoning Act, specifically GLC 40A and SA. They said where it comes from. So I'm going to turn to the attorney and say,
so this is sort of kind of true. There are actually two authorities for zoning. One is the Home Rule Amendment, Section 6, which is Article 89 of the amendments, which gives towns their own power to zone. Secondly, the state may also delegate its power to zone. The constitutional source of its power to zone is from Article 60 of the amendments, which gives them the right to create zones for buildings and to regulate uses within the zones. Originally, this was aimed way back in 1918 at separating industrial uses from residential uses. There is a statute, but 40A Section 4 is only part of the answer. There are a number of other statutes that give towns the authority to zone, particularly by opt-in zoning. For example, Chapter 40R lets you create what are called smart growth districts. There's also a 40S. There's a whole series of special things that you can opt into. So where does if I ask you, where does the town get the authority, and you only give me one statutory site, that I'm afraid is only part of the solution.
is that clear? Okay, so the next question is, are there instances where state law supersedes the town's zoning to all uses or dimensions not permitted under town zoning, and could you provide examples? And he said, let me do this. There we go. He said, the State Zoning Act, specifically GLC 40A, number 3, protects certain uses of property from application of the local zoning. Examples of use protected under the state statute, under this statute, include the agriculture, the interior area of the single-family residential building, religious purposes, educational purposes, child care facilities, solar energy systems, and most recently, accessory dwelling units.
This is another one of those things where the answer is true, but it's only part of the story. There are a number of times and places that we preempt local zoning. Some of them are statutory, like the protection for solar panels. Some of them are constitutional in the case law. For example, the SJC has held, as a matter of state constitutional law, that localities can't pass zoning restrictions about where sex offenders can live, or things like that. There are also a number of federal preemptions. The one that most cities and towns are familiar with is the Telecommunications Act, which preempts local zoning as it relates to building cell phone and radio antennas. There are also a number of state laws allowing you to preempt if you're building, if you are a municipality, or if you're building civil defense structures. So while this is true, it's, again, only part of the story.
Was that clear? Okay, question 3, thank you. Question 3, would approving so-called I'll do my best here. Yeah. So, we're approving the so-called MBTA zoning allows the construction of interior bedrooms without exterior. Okay, start over?
Yeah.
Would approving so-called MBTA zoning allow for the construction of interior bedrooms or bedrooms without exterior windows on properties within the district, so-called inboard bedrooms? The answer was no. Neither GL C40A, paragraph 3A, the so-called MBTA zoning act or act, nor the zoning amendments proposed in North Reading to bring the town into compliance with the act regulate the construction of interior bedrooms, structural alterations of the interior of the existing condominium.
Gotta be the battery.
Condominium units that Martin's Landing is governed by the master deed, condominium bylaws, and state building codes.
So that's correct in that you still have to have a window or a closet, right? I don't know if you've been in apartments that have a closet, which is like exterior, or a window that is a skylight, but there's ways of getting around this. This isn't really the problem. The problem is what everyone knows now to be the no minimum bedroom size, no maximum number of bedrooms, no occupancy limit. So the answer is you can cut up these condominiums and you can stuff in bedrooms to the extent that the sanitary code allows, and to the extent that the sanitary code is checked by somebody somewhere. So the sanitary code allows for you to have a bedroom that is for one person that has 70 square feet, and for 2 or more people, it has to
Could you stand in the middle and say all this?
Yes.
Because then your voice will travel all
Yes,
around.
sorry.
In the middle.
Does this work?
Diane, go first. This way. Come over in here so you're around all of us. We like you.
He doesn't fight.
On the table.
So, thank you. Oh, so, yes, you have to follow this. You have to have a window and a closet. There's variations on windows. There's variations on closets. You can have one of those dividers as a closet, or a wardrobe. I'm guessing. Michael probably knows. For windows, I think we've seen skylights. It's a building inspector. I don't know your building inspector. You have to ask him. This is the exterior thing. Isn't the problem? It's the fact that you can cut up these units into as many bedrooms as can fit. And the sanitary code requires that a bedroom that has one person in it has 70 square feet. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. So a one bedroom unit has to have 70 square feet, one bedroom, one person. Anything beyond that, for 2 or more people, you just need to have 50 square feet per person under the sanitary code. So imagine a condominium building, people pay up through the nose to live in a place where things are spaced out and people are paying according to what is sort of planned out for sewer, for use of the elevator, common spaces, if there's a pool, things like that. And now think of one of those units going up for sale and somebody coming in and buying it, or even somebody living there and wanting to move, or somebody living there and wanting to break up the space to add more people. They can do that if it's in the 3A zone, and all they need is that 70 square feet per, if there's one person in the bedroom, at least 70 square feet, and then if it's more than one person in the bedroom, it's 50 square feet per person, so you can have 4 people in a 200 square foot bedroom, and as many bedrooms as you want, essentially, in the 3A. Oh, any questions about that? Yes?
Who wins?
Who wins?
If somebody can put that in, how does it make their land appreciated? Or how does it make it go the other way?
So I think the question is, who makes out in the situation where you break up the space, right? Or break up the unit and
Lower the price of people who live next to you, and have the effect of traveling on. Okay, and when he starts talking.
Yeah, no, good question. So the question is, when you break up a space, what does that do to the price, and then what does that do to the prices and the units around it, I think is what you're saying.
If somebody else do something that makes my property
Right,
less appealing.
right. So the golden rule is that the more units you have on a piece of land, the higher value it is to the person who owns the land. So say you have a one home on a quarter of an acre. Well, now you take off that home and you put up 3 stories, 6 units. What I'm making it up, but now they're $500 grand a piece. They are, now we're at what, $3 million. So the land underneath becomes infinitely more valuable. Same thing in a condo situation. If you technically the golden rule is higher bedroom count units go for more money. My husband and I went on a date night the other night in East Boston, and we went to this place called MBTA. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's where the clipper ship apartments are. And as we were walking around that area, and East Boston is very, very built out now, and as we were walking around that area, I noticed that there were these giant high-rises and all these condos there that we've never seen before, and they're everywhere, just giant high-rises. And so I was just really curious about what they were charging. They have things from studios to 3-bedroom apartments. They go, anyone have a guess what the range is? East Boston waterfront. For a 3-bedroom apartment, just guess.
5 to 7,000.
1.2.
Rentals, these are good guesses. The rentals from studios to 3-bedroom apartments they start at $2,900 a month and they go to $9,200 a month. So that gives you any indication of what a 3-bedroom is going for on the waterfront in East Boston. It was a surprise to me.
Which identifies a lot of construction. Okay, so now, and we're going to try to keep these things concise, okay? What are the legal arguments being made against MBTA 3A zoning by other cities, towns represented by KP Law? That's the KP Law is the town council for North Reading. Okay. A, the penalty for non-compliance is limited to what is stated in the GLC 40A 3A. Specifically, loss of eligibility for the 4 grant programs identified in the state statute. The Attorney General may not request and a court may not order a town to adopt compliant zoning or impose compliant zoning on a town. B, the guidelines promulgated by EOHL for determining compliance with the statute were not properly adopted as regulations pursuant to GLC 30A, and thus are not legally
the guidelines exceed the authority given to EOHLC and the legislature. Specifically, the guidelines for determining the required size of the zoning district and the capacity for housing in that district go well beyond what the legislature authorized and intended in GLC 40A 3A. Compliance under the guidelines will result in material and substantial negative consequences that unequally and unfairly burden small municipalities.
All right, so for those who don't know, KP Law is the largest municipal law firm in Massachusetts. They not only represent North Reading, they represent Linfield, they represent a ton of other cities. Actually, they don't represent Linfield, I lied. They represent a ton of cities and towns. I think they boast of something like 90 out of 351 cities and towns. So to answer how they came up with this, there are actually 2 towns that voted to send amicus briefs into the state Supreme Court to support the town of Milton, which is being sued by the Attorney General over this exact law. One is the town of Hamilton, and the other is the town of Middleborough. And KP Law wrote briefs and sent them in, and this is more or less the outline from the table of contents from the briefs that KP Law submitted in support of. But there are lots of other arguments that towns are making that aren't necessarily represented by KP Law. For example, Holden, there's a gentleman out there by the name of Peter Lucas, who has been leading the charge on the western Massachusetts side against this. One of his primary arguments is that it burdens the infrastructure. The town of Littleton did a study, and their planner estimates that to bring their underground water and sewer infrastructure up to date to house the number of units they've been assigned, they would have to spend $50 million, which is about twice their total annual budget. So there are a number of arguments out there. Some cities and towns that have opposed this argue that it's state-imposed zoning. Others have argued that it violates their independence as municipalities under the state's Home Rule Amendment, where they have the right to zone as they see fit for the benefits of their local community. Others have argued that the state doesn't have the right to impose this. You'll also see some statutory interpretation arguments. One of the arguments made against that the Attorney General in the Milton case said is that because the towns shall have a zoning district, the case law says that shall is a word of command. It means you must. Unfortunately, we lawyers get very well paid to determine ways of weaseling around, and the first answer is that there's a whole science of case law about when shall means shall, and when shall means may, and when may means may, and when may means shall. The answer is that sometimes the statute is what we call a mandatory statute, which means that there are consequences, primarily because they're private rights at issue, and sometimes the law is what we call directory. So none of you care a rat's behind if the town is late getting its annual budget into the state to be reviewed for the cherry sheets. Now the towns will care, and that's why it's a mandatory law. But in the same token, none of you at all care if the governor fails to put out a proclamation that says that December the 7th is Pearl Harbor Day. There are no private rights at stake. It doesn't hurt anybody if it doesn't happen, and therefore it's a directory law. So one of the arguments that some towns have been making politically, not so much legally, as they pose this is that
I told you.
I thought you were holding it wrong. He really is a bum, Mike. So if a law is directory, the consequences for non-compliance are strict. They're not stringent. There's no one else. I definitely can't compete with the telephone. You're right, it is a bum, Mike. So one of the arguments in support of it being a directory law is that the legislature, when they wrote the law, they promulgated guidelines, and they said if you don't comply, there's 4 guidelines you're ineligible for, 4 grants. I'm told by Mrs. Yull that the town of North Reading is actually ineligible based on income guidelines for 2 of the 4. So no matter how you dice it for North Reading, this isn't a deal.
It's the Democrats.
Those are certainly some of the arguments at issue, but I'll leave it there.
Was that clear? Yeah, but again, see what you're hearing is they tell you only as much as they want you to know. We're finding out everything we need to know. That's the difference.
Yep.
Does approving zoning pursuant to the so-called MBTA Community Zoning Law grant the state, the MBTA, the town, or any other governmental entity any rights to require that any changes occur on properties in the district, including the elimination of the age restriction at Martin's Landing, changes to numbers of bedrooms, and/or changes to number of occupants? The answer, no. In the first instance, neither the Act nor the MBTA bylaw imposed in North Reading require that any property be used in any particular manner, nor do those laws require that any housing be built. They simply set limits on how property may be used. The guidelines, in fact, acknowledge that MBTA zoning district, as with every other zoning district in the town, determine how their property will be used. In the second instance, pursuant to the state law, a new zoning bylaw will not apply to existing structures or uses lawfully in existence, such as this protection is found in the zoning act, GLC 4048, chapter 6, which provides in pertinent part, except as it after providing a zoning ordinance shall not apply to structures or uses lawfully existing or lawfully begun, or to be building or special permit issued or by bylaw required by section 5, which shall apply to any change or substantial extension of such use to a building or a special permit issued after this first notice of said public hearing, to any reconstruction, extension, or structural change of such structure, and to any alteration of the structure begun after the first notice of said public hearing, to provide for its use for a substantially different purpose, or for the same purpose in a substantially different manner, or to a substantially greater extent, except for alteration, reconstruction, extension, or structural change.
Whoa, okay, so structural change to a single or two-family residential structure does not increase the non-conforming structure of said structure. Boy, was that confusing, huh? Okay, so their answer was, this is their answer, the third, it's continuation of the question. Third, the age restriction, number of bedrooms, and number of occupants at Martin's Landing are not regulated by the town zoning bylaws or permits issued thereunder, and will not be regulated by MBTA zoning. Those features were established by the original developer and are governed, if at all, by the master deed and the condominium bylaws. Under MBTA zoning, an existing age restriction of a property subject to the zoning would remain in place, and the owner of the property would be able to implement such a restriction after the zoning was adopted. That was a long one.
So, what's there can stay. You can change it once you put the 3A zone down. It's pretty much as simple as that. What's there is not illegal after you put the 3A zone down. It's just that different stuff can be built now that you put the 3A zone down. It's really not very complicated. It's not illegal that, for example, if you have a place that's mandates it's for 55 plus, it's not illegal that the people that live in those units moved in under those terms. It's simply that after this, you can't have age restrictions. So you don't have to be 55 plus to move in to that place. I hope that makes sense. It's actually very, very simple.
Free to touch this thing. Thank you. Does anybody have a question on that? Okay.
Let me supplement that answer and hope that I don't kill the mic while I'm doing it. So, the short answer in that huge word salad, what you saw is what's called grandfathering. If it's already built, it can stay. But the problem is it completely ignores the fact that zoning is entirely about controlling not just your backyard, but your neighbor's backyard. I'm a libertarian, but I also live in the suburbs, and I don't think my neighbors should be building monstrosities in the backyard that I'm going to be sitting and looking at all day. So zoning is how we come together in the social compact and regulate it. The entire point of MBTA zoning is to unlock local zoning restrictions that are making it hard to build lots and lots of housing units. So the mere fact that what's there can stay doesn't change the fact that the guy next door may be building some monstrosity. The second thing I'm going to tell you that's in there is that they're trying to get away with, oh, the law doesn't say, and then don't point out the rest of the story. Forgive me, for those who are a little older than I am, you may remember Paul Harvey used to talk about the rest of the story. Yes. The rest of the story is that the condo units and townhouses are regulated by the condominium law, which is Chapter 183A. Chapter 183A, in a case involving the town of Dover in 1983, got into an argument with their town over which controlled, whether it's zoning or whether it was condominium documents, and the SJC held with no problem whatsoever that zoning overrides condo docs. So let me ask you this, and it's a little bit of guesswork, but I think I'm in the right. If the whole purpose of MBTA zoning is to create an enclave where we're pulling the rules off, and your condo rules are subject to the zoning rules, are they going to let you, with your private condo docs, lock down something deliberately that isn't going to be true? More importantly, I'll also tell you as a matter of state law that the state can and does override condominium documents. For example, the elderly housing restrictions. There's actually a special state law that gives the municipalities the power to zone for seniors. And the reason that's true is because until they passed that law, it was deemed to be a violation of the public accommodation statute to not let anyone in the world buy anything that they wanted if they could afford it. And sometimes for special populations, like families with kids or elders, we cut special rules. And this whole thing about MBTA zoning is designed to unlock the rules. They're arguing it doesn't say that it's going to take over, but it doesn't tell you the rest of the story. They plopped this law into Chapter 40A, which is the Zoning Act. There's a canon of statutory construction that says whenever the legislature plops a new law into an existing scheme, we try and apply the existing scheme as best as we can. So for example, there are a whole bunch of definitions in Chapter 1 of Chapter 40A. I promise you they apply to Section 3A, the new MBTA zoning law, within 40A. So all of the presumptions that go into interpreting the zoning law are going to apply to MBTA zoning. I didn't break it, it's on you.
Woo! Is this the next one?
Hold on.
Okay. All right.
This is the state guidelines.
A state guideline determining suitability for families with children. Section 3A states that a compliant multifamily zoning district must allow multifamily housing as of right, and that such multifamily housing shall be without age restrictions and shall be suitable for families with children. The EO...
Oh, sorry, with the rest? Okay.
Okay. I mean, that basically put it in a nutshell about children and allowing families to go into and live in Martin's Landing. Okay, so could a state law override a 55-plus age restriction on private residential property? Possibly. However, the Act and the zoning amendment proposed to comply with the Act do not override existing age restrictions on private property.
So I sort of kind of already spoke to this, but the answer is no, it doesn't override existing age restrictions in private things like condo docs. But the only reason that private restrictions in condo docs are allowed is because there are laws that restrict it, like the 55-plus elder housing zoning law. So if you're in an MBTA zone and we take off all the restrictions, including the 55-plus restrictions, it doesn't matter what the contract between the private parties say, it's no longer supported. A different law, Chapter 151B, the public accommodations law, will come in and say that it's age discrimination and will undo the restriction. Yes.
Question.
In the back, yes, sir.
Have you gotten clarification from this, on this over 55, from the state, from the administrators of the project?
No one's gotten any,
We have asked, we have a condo, a building, several actually in our proposed zone here, not here in Winthrop, but in Winthrop where I live, and have asked the estate several times for confirmation that it does not supersede condo docks. We will never see that, ever, ever, because there are 177 towns subject to this law, and a lot of them have attempted to game it by doing what they thought was a paper compliance situation. We now know that paper compliance doesn't exist. Actually, I look forward to hopefully getting to my part of the conversation when I've taken a look at your unconstrained land in the proposed zones. I think on Lowell Road, and you've got a lot. You've got, let's see, so you've got 82 acres proposed. You only actually are required to zone for 50, by the way. Not sure if you knew that. You got 82 acres, 59.47 of which, according to the MAPC, who we all love unconditionally, is unconstrained land. If you take the EOHLC's calculations and multiply that by 15 acres per unit, you've got 892 units. With an estimated population growth, if you're talking about, units, per Mr. Yull's comments here are for families, so looking at 3+ bedrooms apiece. We're looking at a population growth of an estimated 2,600 to 4,400 people. And an additional school-age children population of about 633 kids. And the reason I know that is because my father has now jumped on the bandwagon and is trying to help us in Winthrop and has done all the math and has looked at the state, not only the state tools that they give you to estimate what it costs to build a new school, but also what new schools are actually being built for today. And what he found out was that new schools cost between $52 million and $146 million apiece. So if you're talking about 633 new kids, I imagine you'll likely need a new school in the event that 3A is adopted and here in North Reading. Yes, sir.
So that's not a realistic assertion in terms of Martin's Landing, which is currently zoned over 55, or not zoned, sorry, it's currently contracted over 55. My question for you is, can you make a positive assertion tonight to the people in this room that the over 55 contract that exists today is under threat if the overlay is passed?
Yes. The reason is,
I'm sorry, and the follow-up to that is, do you have supporting legal, and I know you use a precedent, the other gentleman used a precedent, but you have a written, documented, supporting evidence of that fact?
the 3A guidelines state that you cannot restrict age. You cannot put a cap on bedroom size. You cannot put a cap on number of bedrooms, and you cannot put a cap on occupancy. And that is because these guidelines are specific to allow for families with children. And the EOHLC, along with their partners, have determined that these are the requirements in a 3A zone that is designated for families with children. At the end of the day, like I said, a lot of other communities have tried to game the system by putting these things over existing apartments. The problem is they don't just put the square over the building. They put a circle around it. And that's why I mentioned you have 59.47 acres of unconstrained land. And I'm actually getting this from a resource that the EOHLC uses and developers use to look at, where can we put stuff? What is the residential capacity in the designated zone? So to answer your question, do we have an opinion from the EOHLC to say, no, there is no superseding of condo docks? No, and we won't see that. But we do have a guideline that is coming down from the Attorney General, whom, she states that this is her power, that she can come and enforce this and appoint a special master, which we'll find out in a couple of weeks in the Milton case. We do have a case or a situation where she's kind of saying, actually, you must allow us to come and supersede your condo doc laws, because the underlying zoning law, which those condos are located in, that's what those condo docs have to comply with.
And what is that particular case referred to that she has called out?
Milton versus Attorney General. It's coming up on October 7th, and it's actually live streamed. I think everyone should tune in. I will certainly be while I'm working from home.
So, to some of your questions, they're giving you information, and this is something you can take home to, and you can do your own research, and not necessarily rely on them, and not necessarily rely on the town, okay? But it's information that you can take back and say, they said this at this meeting or at that meeting, and you can do your own research, and in that way, you'll know, you'll be more educated as a result of it. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. Mike? Okay. Does the state law that requires North Reading to create a district for multifamily residential by right zoning, MBTA zoning, or 3A zoning, override the 55 age restriction at Martin's Landing? And could you provide a relevant case law? No. MBTA zoning does not override existing age restrictions on the use of private property. Further, as explained above, in the answer to question 5, a new zoning bylaw, here we go again, new zoning bylaw or amendment cannot apply to existing structures or uses lawfully in existence, such as Martin's Landing. I am not aware of any case holding that the 55 plus restriction imposed on the owners of private property was or could be eliminated by the passage of zoning bylaws. Under MBTA zoning, an existing age restriction on property subject to the zoning would remain in place, and the owner of the property would be able to implement such a restriction after the zoning was adopted.
It just takes a woman's touch, I guess.
So, the question is, if we create an MBTA zone, does it override the 55 restriction? And we sort of went over this a moment ago, and I hope all of you saw when I put up the case from the town of Dennis. That's Goldman versus the town of Dennis. Goldman says that Chapter 183A, which is the condo law, does not override 40A, which is the zoning law. But there's another case, if you care to look, because we actually had this question come up with Winthrop, so I already researched the answer, and that is that the condo law, that's Chapter 183A, does not insulate properties from any kind of zoning restrictions, and the most recent example is in Brookline, when they tried to put in rent control. And someone didn't like rent control, and so they tried to use the condo law to get around it, and it didn't work. That case is Grace versus Brookline, 379 Mass 43 from 1979. So there's certainly some cases to support the idea that any restriction, whether it be age restriction or whether it be setbacks or height, are all subject to being undone if you erect one of these MBTA zones. Yes, ma'am?
So will this only apply to condominiums? I mean, couldn't they build apartment buildings as well and just have tenants in there who aren't paying taxes?
Yes, absolutely. So in many ways, although not exclusively, the MBTA's zoning encourages the creation of apartment buildings. We've been using condos because we assume that developers will get the most bang for their buck, and sometimes they want to get in and get out quick with $1 million condos instead of hanging around as a landlord. Just to you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so.
I have a question.
Who has a question?
So there's this zone that you said is off of Lowell Street. Is it only applicable to that zone, or could my next door neighbor decide to enact this MBTA 3A, and I could have an apartment building next door to me.
First of all, I love this question because the people that come to our meetings, I'm so tempted to bring a volunteer sheet. You know, would you volunteer your home for 3A? So the answer is not today. The zone that this is what we all, many probably people in this room affectionately call it the camel's nose underneath the tent, right? This is the beginning. So once you basically give away your rights, and it's not to the state. The state has decided you're going to give away your rights to developers because this is by right, and they have the force of state law to come in and supersede your local zoning laws. And they will put up something, and you have no say. You can go to your local planning board meetings or zoning board of appeals meetings and say, I don't like this, but your zoning board of appeals or your planning board, at least in our town, can only say, okay, well, unless you don't like the setback or the front of the building, kind of like see your way out of the door. Because we don't care if you don't like the number of people here or the fact that we have no parking, because these are by right buildings and these developers now have been handed your rights under state law to supersede your zoning rights. So the answer to the question is not today. If they're in the zone, it is a by right situation where developers can do what they like. Tomorrow it might be like a raising your hand, I want to be, or I'm moving and I want to volunteer for 3A. Who knows? We don't know, and that's another part of the equation, right? In I want to say, Michael, how many municipalities have actually been approved? I think 3, right? Or 2 or 3? 3. Only 3.
All the way through every check.
Every check. So that's Arlington, Lexington, and Salem. So we have those 3 letters. And at the bottom of those letters, there's, I think, 4 bullet points that says what those towns can expect going forward. And they can expect to have to comply with any changes that come their way. They can expect audits. They can expect, if there are changes to the MBTA system, that they will have to, change things around. And they can expect to have to approve any changes on that land that would impact the number of units that were anticipated to be able to go there. They can expect to have to go to the EOHLC and get approval to make those changes. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. I think that's pretty clear. You have a good question?
How many towns actually do not comply with this and voted against it? And how many towns have actually sued the state up to this point?
So there are about 17 towns that are resisting in various states. Some of them have brought it to town meeting and voted it down. Some of them have declined to bring it up. Some of them have taken it up and postponed it. Others have refused to even bring it to a vote. Some are suing. Some are openly saying, come and get me. And so they're I could love...
Vineyard doing?
They're not subject to it. Although those fools in Bourne just voted to join the MBTA in the last 6 months. And so now there's 178 communities that are subject to this.
Dick, yep.
Thanks, Jeff. I took a few minutes to look over the deed restrictions on Martin's Landing. And it looks like they're supposed to be in accordance with the Housing for Older Persons Act of 1995, HOPA of the Federal Fair Housing Act, 42 USCS section 3607 B2C, issued by the Secretary of HUD. So even though this is all in the deed, it's of no value. And we've held protection. Is that correct?
Well, I'm a partisan, so don't take my word for it. But yes, that's what I tell you. To put it in perspective, think back to the dark days in the South where you had people who were putting in covenants into their housing that they weren't going to rent to minorities. And those were all struck. And they weren't partly by court action, but the major reason those were struck were by congressional and state enactments where they said, we're not going to let you discriminate. We in Massachusetts have a very advanced public accommodations law. We, generally speaking, do not let people discriminate for any reason. Age, race, sex, religion, national origin, you name it. The reason that your deed restriction says that it complies with the federal law is that they decided in the mid-1990s that encouraging housing for elderly was important. Up until that moment, you could only discriminate in favor of elderly people in housing if you were the government, because the government can't be sued for discrimination, for whatever reason. It's now approved limitedly to allow private entities to discriminate in favor of, but not against, elderly people and to create elderly communities. But that law in Massachusetts, the specific state implementation of it, is subject, basically it's an opt-in law, where first the state says you can do it, then the town votes a zone where it can be done, and then that will support the legality of a deed restriction. But this MBTA zoning law is specifically designed to combat restrictive zones. It's designed to go in and say that your age restrictions or whatever doesn't work. In the guidelines, it's explicitly on its face is deliberately designed to say that in the zone you cannot have age restrictions. Now, as town council pointed out, it will grandfather what exists. Like anything new, anybody changes, anybody sells out, and it's no longer binding. They can get out of it.
Thank you for that, Mike. Okay. Does the zoning bylaw pending for the October 7th town meeting override 55 plus age restrictions and landing, given the law's language that the zoning permits housing shall be without age restrictions, shall be suitable for families with children? No, is the answer. His answer. For the reasons set forth regarding the effect of zoning bylaws. The following language of GL 48-3A shall be without age restrictions shall be suitable for families with children. Refers, in my opinion, to requiring zoning ordinance or bylaw that a town must adopt, not the housing itself. In other words, a zoning bylaw that allows for multifamily housing, meaning the requirements of GLC 40A, Chapter 3A, cannot limit such housing to certain age groups or impose other restrictions on development that would discourage or prevent the development of multifamily housing suitable for families with children. The owner of a land within the district, however, may decide on his or her its own to construct multi-family housing and impose such occupancy limitations. That was how the restriction at Martin's Landings were imposed. Could you hear that last part?
We can't hear you.
That was how the restrictions at Martin's Landing were imposed.
I think this question is funny because the person who answered it started off, no, but then they said, yes, you can, yes, it does override the situation. At the end of the day, this is, we've kind of talked about it a lot, but this is by right, and it's state law. And at the end of the day, you cannot stop someone from coming in and building something different than what you had planned in this spot. I'm sensitive to a lot of people in the room who are affected by this the superseding of the 55 plus. And I'm especially sensitive to it because my mother's condominium happens to be in a proposed zone in Winthrop. So we've gone through this over and over and over and over again, and our town has requested confirmation from Augustus, Secretary Augustus over and over and over again. We will never see that, and I'm fully well aware of that. And we've gone through her condo docs, and many people have sent them to me, so I know them well. And I can tell you with I can tell you with very, very strong confidence that at the end of the day, whomever decides to do something different than what has been decided by the people who live there today in that space is allowed to do it in the event that the 3A zone goes there because of the relaxed restrictions.
Okay. All right. What steps would be required to eliminate the 55-plus age restriction at Martin's Landing, and would approving so-called MBTA zoning change those steps? The steps required to eliminate the 55-plus restriction at Martin's Landing would be found in the master deed and condominium bylaws. At a minimum, approval of the unit owners of condominiums would be required. Minimum MBTA zoning has no effect on and cannot change that process. Okay, number 10. Yeah, I mean.
So this is state law. In our town, what our public process gives you is they put up an agenda, and then you as citizens can go and voice your opinion, and then our planning board and zoning board of appeals will make decisions based on what works for the area, what potentially poses a health and safety hazard, what could potentially create a lot of traffic, what goes with their surroundings aesthetically. That goes away. It's crazy to say because zoning is so inherently local. You all know this town, you know this area better than Maura Healy or Secretary Augustus to think that your right to show up at these meetings and to voice your opinion, say if something was going up next to you that would vehemently impact your quality of life, and basically what you signed up for when you signed that deed or when you purchased that property is just astronomically insane to me. Most people's homes are their biggest asset, and that's what we have to pass on to our children. At least that's the case for me. So to think that I would no longer have a say in what happens in my town that I know very well, and especially my neighborhood, is just is unfathomable. But yes, so this is by right. There's nothing you would do about it if that's the decision.
Okay, number 11. Does state law, specifically MGL 40B section 3A, override an HOA for properties falling within the law's overlay when or if passed by the town? Specifically, where the HOA within the 40B3A overlay restricts residents age 55 and over, and conversely the state law prohibits age restriction, does the state law override the HOA, or does the HOA trump, like that word, trump the state law in this scenario? Please provide any relevant law. The answer to all three questions above is no, for the reasons stated above and the answers to questions 5 through 8 above. To summarize, a new zoning bylaw, there you go again, a new zoning bylaw. Okay. 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 No. Here's one of the women. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Eileen, get up there and read it.
Yeah, so what's the order? Yeah.
Good idea.
Go Irene.
He needs a break anyway.
So the answer to all three questions above, for the reasons, for the reasons stated above in the answers to questions 5 through 8 above. To summarize, the new zoning bylaw does not apply to existing use of property, such as the existing age-restricted housing at Martin's Landing. Further, zoning bylaws do not alter or eliminate existing private contractual agreements and interests in property, such as an HOA. They simply define what use property owners may of their property going forward. Okay. The following excerpt from an opinion of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court provides a general summary of the law regarding freedom of contract and legislation.
So, can you hear her? Is that what, does anybody have a question on this?
Okay, I got a loud enough voice. So, remember that the whole point about zoning is controlling not just what you can do with your property, but what your neighbor can do with theirs. So you really don't care if if you're still subject to an age 55 restriction. In terms of the homeowner, the law treats the homeowner restrictions between private parties the exact same way it would treat an elderly restriction. Generally speaking, we don't allow people to discriminate based on age, sex, race, national origin, or anything else you can think of. The reason that we have elderly zoning districts is to specifically authorize and protect deeds between private parties to allow them to discriminate in a way that we don't normally allow. But MBTA zoning runs contrary to that. It's specifically designed to unlock. And in terms of this, the freedom to contract, you see the date on the case of that's right here? That's 1924. That's before Franklin Roosevelt. And I don't mean that to make fun of anyone who was living when Franklin Roosevelt was in charge, but there was a constitutional revolution in law about the freedom to contract when Roosevelt was in charge. They called it the New Deal. You may remember from your history books, the switching time that saved 9. That, when lawyers study that, all of a sudden there's a new deference to legislative policy making where the courts won't touch it. So if you see anything that says the freedom of contract was dated before 1933, be suspicious. A lot of this is not still good case law. And I don't know why the town council would bother to cite it to you. It's a terrible example.
All right, the state law, specifically MGL 40P, Section 3A, override an HO for properties falling within the law. Did you read this already?
Nope.
No, in law's overlay, when it passed by the town. Specifically, where the HOA within the 40P 3A overlay may restrict the number of bedrooms, and conversely, the state law prohibits any such restriction on bedroom numbers. Does this state law override HOA, or does the HOA trump, I like that word, state law in this scenario? Please provide any relevant case law. The answer is to all three.
Yeah, before it was 5 feet above.
Okay. Okay.
Don't worry about it. We'll scroll down.
I thought we read that. Okay. Is it an option? If so, what would be the impact of adding the following line to the proposed Lowell Road multifamily zoning district? Age-restricted housing is expressly allowed as a by right use. Any proposed zoning bylaw on a town meeting warrant may be amended by motion at town meeting. In my opinion, this particular amendment would be consistent with and within the scope of the bylaw presently proposed and could be made without altering the effect of that bylaw.
So, if you amended the bylaw, the town meeting is going to look at and say you can have age-restricted housing of right, the developer can build age-restricted housing, but to put it to you another way, if I were a developer and I could buy housing I could sell to anybody, or I could buy housing and I could sell to a small segment, what are you going to build? Again, this is about zoning. What we're talking about is preserving restrictions on not just what you, but what your neighbor can do with his property. And every time you see by right, it says that your neighbor is no longer subject to the same restrictions that govern your community today. That's the essence of the change in MBTA zoning. yes, it doesn't necessarily directly override your homeowners association, but if there's a conflict, and there is a strong public policy in the MBTA zoning law to undo restrictions like this, so whether there's a conflict or not, it is an open question, but I tend to think pretty strongly that it would. But even if you leave all that aside, what good does it do to allow your neighbor to build age-restricted housing if he wants to? You want to know that he is bound or he isn't bound. You don't care what his freedoms are, you want to know what rules he's playing by, so that you know what's going up in your backyard, admittedly on your neighbor's side of the fence.
Okay, last question. Yes. Yes.
So if you're in a condo and a developer comes into your condo building and he buys 4, 5, 6 units, can he convert those into more bedrooms and multifamilies? Yes. Is that what this is?
By right, state law.
The answer was yes, by right.
What does by right mean?
By right means you, so, yeah, the essential state, so it's state law, but it's, you don't need special permission, is really what it is. And when you think of condominium laws and documents that you signed on to, which is a contract, all those it must be in compliance with the underlying zoning law. So what 3A does is it changes the underlying zoning law. So if what you've got today, and I apologize, I didn't look at North Reading's bylaws in this area today, your zoning ordinances, if what you have today differs from what 3A is, then when the overlay comes, it's not that the overlay makes everything there illegal, it just changes what's allowed on the land. And as a result, any agreements that you have in place that are based on what has been there in the past now also necessarily change when there is a conflict with the new overlay zoning on that land.
Okay?
To put that in a different perspective, zoning is primarily written into 3 buckets. There's yes you can, there's no you can't, and yes you can with permission. Permission in this instance is normally given out by the Zoning Board of Appeals, but in some narrow circumstances it's given out by your elected planning board. What this does, primarily of right, is designed to help developers, if they're building, know what to expect. It gets rid of the gray area. So there's stuff where we allow single-family zoning and we ban rocket fuels and chemistry labs, but we'll allow a garbage dump if it's in permission, if it's away from other people, if it meets a list of conditions. And that's what local zoning is. There are lots of lawyers who spend their entire careers eating off of that gray area where they're trying to convince your local planning board that yes, you should allow what my guy wants.
Yeah.
MBTA zoning says in this enclave, either it is in or it's not, there's no special permission. That's what of right means. Some towns have tried to tell their populations that, oh, we still have site plan review. Site plan review is basically a paperwork check. It doesn't say that you can't build whatever it is that you want. It just says that it has to comply with the bare minimums, which are height and setbacks. And that's it. If I can fit my rocketry lab or my chemistry lab or my amazingly dense housing in 6 stories and that's allowed, then the planning board can't tell me no. This openly takes discretion out of the hands of your local officials and it puts it back in the hands of the developer. It's designed to free up. And the libertarian loves that, but living in suburbia, I'm not so much a fan of it.
We can change that.
I have a question.
Yeah, I keep hearing about condos and condos and condos. We have private houses here, single family, that if they sell, somebody can come in and put up, so it's not just affecting the condo owners, it's affecting all the individual homeowners also, and a lot of other things that go with it, the schools, the police, the fire, and everything else. If we start having some contractor come in and say, oh, I like that cape, let's put it into a 3-family home, you know.
So,
And it gets worse, because I don't know about North Reading, but at least in Linfield, in the swanky section of town, we have acre zoning. The statutory minimum is 15 units per acre. That's not even 4 triple deckers and quarter acre lots. That's bigger than a triple decker. You're absolutely right.
But we only have septic in North Reading, we don't have sewer, so Title V code is going to prohibit some things from being, I believe.
This is one argument that was made to the Attorney General, to the SJC in the Milton case. The statute says that any MBTA zoning that's built is still subject to the sanitary code and the environmental code. But the guidelines explicitly say zone irrespective of it, and then we'll let the developer sort out what the zoning code, what the environmental code is. So for any of you who may be familiar with big developments, as long as they're willing to build their own septic system, they can get away with anything in the world. Yes, it makes it more expensive, but we're going from a world where now they can't to yes, they can if they get enough money.
Yes.
I have a question in regards to, I'm sorry, Mike, this might be for you, or maybe both of you. In regards to the Edgewood Apartments, I actually did a little bit of homework and I looked up the square footage of each one of those apartments. And I came up with, there are 3 different outlines. They have the lilac, the mayflower, and the gardenia. And they're 786 square feet, 833 square feet, and the other one is 880 square feet. Is it conceivable to say in these units that if they had a dining room that was, say, 14 by 20, and there were 2 windows in that dining room, is it conceivable to say under this law that you could add 2 bedrooms to that? Is that right?
Yeah. Has anyone ever heard of pad splits?
What?
Pad splits? Pad splits. Split pads? Pad splits. Yeah. This is actually a company. I think there's actually several companies that do the same thing. And they are designed to maximize revenue generation for people who own the buildings that the pad splits exist in. A lot of pad splits are focused on breaking up actual single-family homes to stuff in as many bedrooms as possible. They frown upon common spaces because the pad splits company discourages guests. And the reason for that is because they don't want people lingering around, and it also minimizes the amount of money they can make by stuffing a bunch of bedrooms in the space. So to answer your question, absolutely a living room or a common area is fair game if you're trying to stuff as many bedrooms in as possible. And certainly it's a situation in a 3A designated zone.
Just a quick follow-up. So even if that was a living room, say you have a living room and a dining room, they took the living room out, and so if the windows, if that was available, they could split that up into multiple bedrooms. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's so interesting that you said that, because even the reason I even realized this and started researching it is because in my town we don't actually have minimum or bedroom sizes. In my town, you can have as small a bedroom as you want. For example, in a 1-bedroom apartment, you can have 700 square feet. And that just says, in a 1-bedroom space, we feel like 700 square feet is a livable space for a human being. It's not like a tenement from the 1900s. It's a place where you can walk around and have a place to sit and have a place to eat. And because of this no minimum bedroom size, no maximum number of bedrooms, no occupancy limit, you can now take that 700 square feet and stuff as many bedrooms as you wanted to, so long as it has, 50 square feet per person in the bedroom. So yeah.
So this is sort of in line of what Pat was asking about for the rest of North Reading. So right now, the zoning area is Martin's Landing and Edgewood, because although there's more than 50 acres there, but it was a nice, easy, sort of low-hanging fruit, right? There's lots of units already. There's 408 in Edgewood, and there's, equal amount probably in Martin's Landing, but it's also growing. There's another building that needs to be finished, and So the question to our wonderful lawyers here is, let's say at town meeting, we vote down the zoning law of the MBTA 3A Act at town meeting. When and can the state come back again and now start looking at other acreage in North Reading? Because it doesn't have to be 50 acres together. It can be 5 acres here, 5 acres there. They're looking for 15 units per acre. So if they take 5 acres, they could put 75 units in this 1 acre, right? So they'll take whatever they can, and at different spots. So if we find a great place on 28, that we think this would be a good location for a new fire station because we're in need of one, well, the EOHLC can come back and say, oh, no, 28, that is a perfect spot for multifamily housing because it's within walking distance to a church. It's got shopping and all that stuff. So that's the background in my head here. So the question is, Michael, if we vote this down for this parcel of land, can they come back again at us, and when do we have to wait a couple of years, or when can they come back and ask us to do this again for different parcels of land?
So the answer to that is a little bit of a gray area in law. There is a provision that says in order to avoid tiring the voters out, if there's a no, it means no for 2 years unless the planning board gives them a special exemption. And that's buried in 40A Section 5. Now, how close you have to be, if it's an MBTA zoning district at number 51 Lowell Street, and then it becomes a zoning district at number 49 Lowell Street, I'd say they're the same thing. There is only one case that deals with this provision of law. It's an appeals court case from 2018, represented by your friends at KP Law. They lost that one. And the appeals court said anything vaguely or conceptually similar is good enough to trigger the 2-year can't bring it back rule. But that's the only case on. It's subject to being overturned by the state Supreme Court, and it's kind of an open question of law.
Thank you. So we've gone through all of the questions, okay? I think we have a question, Bob?
Yeah.
Or Robert? You prefer Robert, don't you?
It doesn't matter. Why don't you spell it? What's the proposed impact on this 20 Elm development that's going in behind the Thompson Club? That's a rental, proposed rental property with 200 units. And in general, will this give the developers more leeway? We're already fighting it on a 40B basis, and they're going to have another arrow in their quiver to try to ram this down our throats.
Jeff.
So it's my understanding that the zone that they're currently looking at does not embrace the parcel behind the Thompson Club, which, by the way, was way better as a country club than it was as a steakhouse. But to answer your question, the statute only says that every city and town has to have a district of reasonable size, and what's reasonable size is determined by the state housing department. And it's their position that they don't have to do anything other than whip out a new change. They don't have to promulgate it, they don't have to publish it in Mass Register, they don't have to do notice and comment, they don't have to take public input. So there's nothing that says that tomorrow they won't bring from 50 acres to 100 acres, and when they do, behind the Thompson Club is exactly where they're going to put it. So it doesn't affect it today, but it very well might affect it tomorrow.
I just want to also make a comment about 40B. So 40B is a law that is actually for low-income housing, and there's 3 sort of flavors of safe harbor from 40B. I imagine North Reading is probably on the you have to maintain a 10% 10% of subsidized housing in your town flavor, which is the first safe harbor. If you dip below that, and I haven't looked, so don't quote me on that, but if you dip below that, that means that a developer can come in and supersede your zoning laws just like 3A. And the difference being, the thing they can build, which by the way, if they build something, it gives you safe harbor, I think for 2 years. Michael can correct me. What they build does have to be, I think, 25% 25% affordable or 10% affordable units for 40B.
Oh, 40B, it's 20% of its rent, it's 25% of its own.
25% of its own, 20% of its rent. But the difference being that the people that would be eligible for those units actually have to make 80% of the area median income or below. The difference with 40A, Section 3A, the MBTA Communities Act, is that you don't qualify for the possible 10% affordable units unless you make 80% of the area median income or above. It's essentially the same thing as the rest of the thing. So it's not affordable. It's just an interesting thing that I want to point out because 40B, for all of its faults, and everybody hates it, and it's the same problem where they can come in and supersede your zoning laws, is actually for low-income housing as opposed to 3A, which is just flat-out market rate. You cannot have low-income, you cannot mandate low-income housing in a 3A apartment, or building, 3A construction. Oh, yes. Yep, there it is. Yes.
Who proposed the parcel of land on Walsh Street? Was that our planning commission? Or how did that come about?
Thanks, Joe. Really, you can pick it anywhere. I'll back up. First, you needed to be per the statute 0.5 miles from rapid transit, and that's rail station, bus station, all that stuff. We didn't comply with that, so when the state came back with the revised or the final guidelines, they said we're going to let you choose one parcel or parcels of your own. So even though they don't really comply with the statute of the law, they're beyond. The closest one I think is about 2 miles to the Wellington MBTA station. So we never complied with the 0.5, but they let us and other towns pick anything. So they picked these 2 parcels, and from the town's perspective, it was a win because they were already developed, or mostly, let's say, with Martin's Landing. And they were able to, get the numbers, get the parcel size, and get it close enough to what one would consider, a transportation route towards 93 or whatever. So that was the thinking. But our planner then put that together, put the proposal to the state, and the state accepted the proposal. And that's it's no different than a lot of towns did that. They try to find some land that perhaps maybe. Was developed, and we were lucky enough again in North Reading to be able to propose developed property. Other towns are not so lucky, and that's, I think, you see even more opposition because, as Michael pointed out earlier, that's just major strains on the infrastructure and what have you. So that answers the question, though. That's how it came about.
Thank you, Mr. Beverly. Okay.
To help add to that answer, the state and its publicly funded think tanks, including MAPC, have uploaded all the state's assessor parcel data into a GIS system. And MAPC has actually assigned to every individual parcel a development index to indicate, based on its access to infrastructure and its cost and its value, how readily and how susceptible it would be to development. And I suspect that this is probably the suggestion of the MAPC index more than anything else.
And I just want to, so that people don't get mad at the CPC for this. So David, Mr. Ridloff, how long ago did they ask us to parcel out a section of land? How long ago,
Yeah, it was passed in 21. They didn't have guidelines until December of that year, as I recall, and they were just preliminary. So it took 11 months to get even preliminary guidelines, and then the final guidelines came out in the summer of '22, and that's when they added the 4th discretionary grant from the original 3. And from there, it's been, you know, they've been more into a compliance mode. But that's how long ago it was. Charlie Baker signed it into law in January of '21.
Right, January 21, Governor Baker signed it, yeah.
Yep.
But it's being enacted now, and it's scary. And so I just wanted to say that, so the town was asked to define a parcel of land over a year ago. And then Jeff Griffin and Dave Redloff went through hours and hours and days and lots of research. And we should give them an applause, because it's all of their hard work. And since then, we've been finding out little things, reading the facts between the lines. And then once they saw that, wait a minute, this is not just a simple, oh, no problem, there'll be no changes. Realizing when they're reading the enormous amounts of information in the law, and the EOHLC has 19 pages of their own. This is just, it's an unelected agency that will be deciding what happens, right? And so it's not the state necessarily, but the state's agency. And so the more they saw this, the more we thought we need to learn more about this. But most importantly, the townspeople need to know more about this so that they know what they're voting for, because I know people in Andover are beside themselves because they said, this one woman said, we had no idea what we were voting for. And now they're all up in arms because they don't like what they're seeing. So kudos to you guys and that's what gave Jeff and I the impetus, and we have a committee that's been super beneficial to us, and helping to research and asking questions and fine-tuning what we know. So yeah, no one was deciding, well, let's put it to Martin's Landing. Nobody realized at that time how much you would be affected.
Before I just turn this over to you, I just want to clarify something. The Community Planning Commission has nothing to do with this arrangement, okay? As I said, the facilitator of this evening was the North Reading Republican Town Committee. It was based on the support by the Committee to Save Our Towns, okay? And if anybody is listening and they think that there's something going on here, no. They had nothing to do with this. The select board had nothing to do with it. And no new.
Jeff, we even had a meeting tonight, just so everyone knows. That's why I left, Jeff left.
Right, yeah.
We attended a Zoom meeting at 7:30, lasted about half an hour, came back in.
Okay, as I said, we do it independently. We don't try to take favors and sides. I think Jeff has something to say.
So I just wanted to share a few things that, we have put a lot of work into this, and we have listened to the community. And over the last year and a half, I've questioned so many things. We've had so many questions, and a lot of those questions at times would fall up empty, or we get the runaround, or whatever it was, and it was discouraging. My point is that I will always question them. I will always bring it to the table. I will always listen to the people and what they ask. That's what I'm here for. And with this particular 3A law, the zoning law, right from the very beginning, this thing was just word salad after word salad. Very difficult to unbundle. Even to get to the point we are at today, we've learned so much as a community. We've listened to both sides. We've listened to the town. We've listened to these attorneys here tonight. We've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. Every time I attend one of these things, I learn something new. So I can assure you that I will continue to question. I will continue to work for you and protect the town in any way I can and whatever is best for the people. But I do know this. I did learn one thing recently, and it really hit me hard. The town and the people are actually two different things. They really are. Because the town is saying one thing, but yet the people are saying something else. And I was elected by the people to work in the town. So I have to listen to the people, and I have to present the message and the will of that. So I just want to assure you that we are trying our best. Well, I am trying my best to get through this. So we'll continue on, and I know that I just wanted to say thank you for the attorneys tonight that came up. Thank you. I think it's great. I always do. I write notes down. I learn. So I just want to thank you guys. I wanted to thank the committee to Save Our Town Rights, because that really says it all. That says everything. This is what this is about. This is all about the root of what's going on as a community. And this is happening, just so you know, this is happening all over the place. This isn't just Massachusetts. I've looked into some stuff in California and Colorado and some decisions and all that stuff. So it's happening everywhere. We really are, as a society, have a lot to deal with. So anyways, with that, I just want to say thanks again, and thanks for having me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what time do we have?
10 minutes left. I think Diana's going to close the argument.
Okay. And then I'm going to make a comment after she's done.
Okay, great. So I think in closing, what's your name, sir? Jeff. Jeff, amazing. Jeff is an amazing person, and he's a rare breed. And he's right that what we're finding is that we've ended up with a big sort of divide where our representatives aren't representing the people. And I'm not really sure how that happens, but there's some correction that needs to be had here. I'll say that my advice to the town is to be prepared for what happens in Milton. It is possible, based on the argument that they're setting forth, that what could result from that case is the 4 grants. If you don't put the zone in, you don't get the 4 grants. Based on my understanding, you don't get the 4 grants anyways. How? 2 of the 4 you're not eligible for, and perhaps you don't get the other. You haven't seen a penny from the other.
They have no money.
I guess at the end of the day, I raise that because I know for a fact in my town there are some political factions that are going to be full steam ahead anyway. Even though we haven't seen a penny from those 4 grants in 7 years, there may be people in my leadership that are going to push for us to comply. So just keep that in mind, because even if it doesn't go away, there could be remnants, and then what's the game plan? That's number 1. Number 2, Chevron has happened. The overturning of Chevron has happened since this all came about. Chevron's a federal rule. But Chevron basically has been the rule in place for what, 30 years? 1982. Chevron says that agencies come and fill in the gaps. When there's questions about how to comply with something, agencies come in and they explain to you how to comply with this law. And it's crept into making law by bodies that don't have the authority to make law. And the Supreme Court just kicked that out. And it's been unbeknownst to all of us, a plague on our society. The EOHLC embodies that plague because they've created 20 pages of guidelines that have increased the scope of this law as opposed to explained it. They have no authority to do that. They have no regulatory authority whatsoever. And my guess is that the SJC at a minimum will, I'm being, this is my opinion, they may throw that out. So what we might be left with is those 3 paragraphs. Just keep that in mind. Oh, and the EOHLC attorney quit shortly after the Chevron decision, just FYI. And then lastly, there's been 2 times in history where my family and I are in consensus that something like this has happened. Busing and the American Revolution. I have gone to the Boston Tea Party Museum twice month. I went for the first time a few weeks ago, and I was so jazzed that I dragged my whole family this over the weekend, and we threw the tea overboard and everything like that. But at the end of the day, the reason I mention that is because this is very unusual, and Jeff kind of highlighted the fact that it is something that made all of our ears perk up and say this, you know, oh, that sounds very nice, affordable housing, and then we figured out, oh, there is no affordable housing, and then we figured out, oh, this is just a XYZ, and it took a lot of work, and apart from Jeff, everyone in this room is tormented by this situation, and we're kept up at night, and this is our new hobby, which we never wanted in the first place. But all this to say, the nation is watching. Massachusetts is a guinea pig. California certainly was able to overturn the five charter cities that challenged the Supreme Court, or that challenged the rule that made ADUs across the board allowable in California, got the benefit of the ruling that overturned that. So my advice to you is just stay steady, do what's right for your town, and it'll all work out, in my opinion. Oh, and there's a correction. You received $3.2 million over 10 years, which, if you're looking to build a $52 million school, is probably not good math.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, yes, Joy.
We're talking about people might want this to happen because they don't want to lose any grant money or the possibility of any grant money. However, I think they mentioned before, the impacts are not just going to be, obviously, this is all about condo owners because it directly affects us, but the impacts on schools, taxes, fire, rescue, all of that other stuff would be a reason for anybody in the town to be concerned about this. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I'm fairly new to Massachusetts, and when I first read the statute, I said, oh, well, we just want this condo here. Well, it grew not, what are we, more than a half a mile from the station, and we're age restricted, so it doesn't matter, you know. And then when you're talking about Chevron, I mean, the whole Chevron case was about government overreach, like a regulatory overreach. And so I said, well, how can this be? Because if they're going to change it, if we're age restricted, in other words, the regulatory agencies are rewriting the law, which Chevron basically says you can't do, right? So I think that will help. But so I guess the 2 points I wanted to make was about the impacts to the town, not just condominium owners. And the other thing is, so we're age restricted, but this lawyer's telling us that it's not going to affect our age restriction. I mean, it's an oxymoron, isn't it?
Obviously, there's been a big learning curve here from when we first started to get into this subject. What's obvious to me, and with all due respect, Edgewood, you had 49 acres. We only needed 50 to satisfy the requirement. I think it's very unfair to put Martin's Landing into this overlay district. There was no need of it, and it should be taken out if this proceeds, further.
Okay, I'm gonna have to close this up, all right? Thank you all for coming, first of all. Second of all, I want to thank our lawyers for coming, right, Mike and okay. Now, what's next? Okay, what's next? Town meeting. You must gather anybody and everybody you know to attend town meeting on October 7th at 7 p.m. at the North Reading High School gym. Okay, because this is very important. This town meeting, because it's a bylaw change, it will not have a second chance like we did last time with the overlap.
So that the voting is going to be a vote there?
That the voting is going to be done at town meeting. So you must be there. I want to get like 500 people there easily. Okay, so bring everybody in. Everybody who's registered to vote in the town of North Reading can be there and vote. So, and stay to the end. We'll have a strategy all set up, and I'll explain that, not here, but I'll explain that to our team captains, and then we'll, a town meeting you'll know, depending on where you sit. We'll have somebody there to guide you, to make sure that you vote as you want to vote. I'm not going to say how you should vote. It's not for me to say that, but how you want to vote. I have a good idea, but okay.
Vote no.
So, but I want to thank you. The North Reading Republican Town Committee thanks you, and the committee to save our homes, save our rights, home rights. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. Everybody, take care.